There are moments in American history that leave a permanent scar on the country's memory. Moments when fear doesn't just touch a city, it spreads like wildfire across states, across communities, and across generations. Tonight, we go back to one of the darkest chapters of that fear. A chapter that began on warm California nights, under quiet skies, when young couples thought they were safe, when the world moved slower, and when danger felt far away. No one expected that terror would walk straight into their peaceful lives. No one expected that a single man would plunge an entire nation into a kind of paranoia it had never known before. But that is exactly what happened. It started like the beginning of a summer romance. Streetlights glowing softly, cars cruising lazily through Vallejo, teenagers laughing near diners, families preparing for the 4th of July weekend. California felt alive, hopeful. But beneath that calm surface, somewhere in the shadows, someone was watching. Someone who believed the night belonged to him. Someone who thought he could play with human lives the way others played games. July 4th, 1969, Blue Rock Springs Park. A place where young couples often came to talk, to escape their worries, to enjoy the cool night air. Inside a quiet brown Corvair sat 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Majau. They weren't doing anything dramatic. They weren't expecting danger. They were just talking, unaware that a stranger had already chosen them. A stranger who had been following them, studying them, waiting for the perfect moment. A car approached slowly, its headlights washed over them like a spotlight on a stage, and for a second, the world around them froze. The car paused, then drove away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just someone confused or someone who had taken a wrong turn. But 10 minutes later, the same car returned. This time, it parked behind them. The door opened. Heavy footsteps approached, and before Darlene or Michael could say a single word, the man raised a flashlight in one hand, a gun in the other, and started firing. The first shots shattered the windows and tore through their bodies. Michael fell forward, bleeding, trying to understand what was happening. Darlene gasped for air, trying to escape, but the bullets kept coming. The attacker didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't panic. Instead, he walked with a strange sense of calm, as though he were following a routine he had practiced many times before. After emptying his weapon, he turned, walked back to his car, and vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene that would forever change the history of American crime. 30 minutes later, as officers scrambled to respond to the shooting, the phone at the Vallejo Police Department rang. A calm male voice spoke, not shaky, not nervous, not frightened by what he had done. Instead, he sounded almost proud. He described the shooting in detail. He claimed responsibility for another double murder that had happened months earlier at Lake Herman Road. Then, without emotion, he placed the receiver back onto the hook and disappeared into the darkness once again. At that moment, police realized they were dealing with someone unlike any killer they had faced before. This wasn't someone driven by rage or impulse. This wasn't someone trying to hide. This was someone who wanted to be seen, someone who wanted to be known, someone who believed he held all the power. And within weeks, the entire country would know exactly what they wanted them to call him. August 1st, 1969. 3 major California newspapers received letters, each written in precise handwriting, carefully constructed, filled with arrogance and confidence. Inside each envelope was a piece of a cryptogram, pages filled with bizarre symbols, circles, slashes, strange patterns that looked like they were pulled from another world. The letters claimed responsibility for the murders. They included threats of more violence if the papers didn't publish the cipher on their front page. And then came the line that would burn itself into American history. This is the Zodiac speaking. It was the first time the world heard the name that would grip America with fear for decades, the name that would appear in newspapers, police reports, and whispered conversations for years. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a performer, a puppeteer pulling strings, someone who believed he was smarter than everyone else, including the police hunting him. When the letters were published, people across California ran to buy newspapers. Workplaces turned silent as employees stared at the mysterious code. Families gathered around kitchen tables trying to decipher the symbols. Teachers brought them into classrooms. Amateur puzzle lovers spent nights trying to break the cipher. The entire state participated in a desperate attempt to understand the mind behind the madness. It didn't take long. A married couple, school teacher Donald Hardin and his wife Betty, cracked the code within days. The message revealed something horrifying. The writer claimed he killed because it brought him pleasure, because it made him feel alive, because he believed he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. It wasn't just confession, it was a psychological blueprint of someone who enjoyed inflicting terror on an entire nation. But even after solving the cipher, investigators were left with more questions. How did he choose his victims? Why lovers' lanes? Why letters? How did he slip away so easily every single time? Was he acting alone? Or was he part of something bigger, something no one had connected yet? As police struggled with these questions, the Zodiac planned his next move. And when he struck again, he didn't hide behind the shadows of the night. He didn't wait for darkness. This time, he brought horror into the middle of the day, in a public place, in a way that sent a message loud and clear. He wasn't finished. He wasn't afraid. And he wanted the entire world to watch what he would do next.
No one could have imagined how far he would go to make the world watch. Within weeks of his first letters, the Zodiac returned to terrorize California, proving that he was no ordinary criminal. He was meticulous, strategic, and driven by an obsession to control and manipulate fear itself. September 27, 1969, Lake Berryessa, a serene retreat surrounded by golden hills and calm waters, would soon become the site of one of his most chilling attacks. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, two young college students, had chosen this peaceful location to spend a quiet afternoon together. They laughed, shared stories, and soaked in the late summer sun, completely unaware of the danger approaching from the ridge above. A figure appeared. A man, dressed in dark clothing, wearing a hood with a crosshair symbol stitched on the front, the same symbol that had already begun appearing in his letters. His movements were deliberate, slow, calculated. He approached without warning, armed with a gun and a knife, and demanded that the couple tie each other's hands. What followed was brutal. Brian was stabbed repeatedly. Cecilia suffered horrific injuries, yet the killer remained calm, almost methodical, as though he were performing a ritual that gave him power over life and death. When he was done, he walked back to his car, leaving the couple behind in agony, and vanished once again into the hills. Brian survived to tell the story, but Cecilia succumbed to her injuries days later, a young life stolen by a killer who was becoming bolder with every attack. The terror did not end there. Less than 2 weeks later, October 11, 1969, he struck again in the heart of San Francisco. This time, his victim was Paul Stein, a cab driver, going about his routine route. In the busy streets of Presidio Heights, the Zodiac shot Stein at point-blank range, wiped the interior of the cab to remove evidence, and calmly walked away. Witnesses saw him, described him, and yet the man managed to disappear before police could apprehend him. Within hours, a piece of Stein's bloody shirt arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle, accompanied by another letter that taunted the police and claimed responsibility for the murder. His signature crosshair symbol appeared once more, a dark calling card that had become synonymous with fear itself. The Zodiac's letters now became more than just confessions. They were psychological weapons. Each carefully constructed note revealed his obsession with control, his fascination with cryptography, and his desire to dominate the public consciousness. He demanded publication, forced the media to participate in his macabre game, and turned ordinary citizens into puzzle solvers trying to understand the mind of a monster. Parents kept children indoors, couples avoided isolated areas, law enforcement across multiple counties worked tirelessly, often with little more than his cryptic clues to guide them. The Zodiac had managed to orchestrate a climate of fear that spread beyond the physical reach of his crimes. Investigators soon realized that solving the ciphers could give insight into his mind, but they also understood something far more dangerous. The Zodiac enjoyed the hunt as much as the kill. He wanted the public to fear, to speculate, to obsess. Every letter was a taunt, every symbol a signature of power, every unsolved cipher a puzzle that strengthened his legend. He was no longer just a murderer. He had become an enigma, a phantom who moved through neighborhoods, police departments, and newspapers with impunity, leaving behind questions that haunted officers and citizens alike. As 1969 drew to a close, the Zodiac's reign of terror escalated. He sent more letters, included more cryptograms, and claimed responsibility for killings that may never have been connected. His correspondence hinted at a network of crimes, a level of cunning and intelligence that left detectives frustrated and exhausted. Every attempt to profile him, to predict his next move, ended with dead ends. The man seemed always one step ahead, a ghost whose presence could be felt but never seen. By the end of that year, the Zodiac had permanently imprinted his name into American culture. From small towns to big cities, in classrooms and living rooms, in newspapers and police reports, everyone was aware of the chilling declaration. This was the Zodiac, a killer who didn't merely take lives but manipulated a society into living with fear. And with every passing month, the shadow of the Zodiac grew longer, darker, and more terrifying, leaving the world to wonder, when and where would he strike next?
The uncertainty gnawed at every corner of California. Families locked their doors early, couples avoided late-night drives, and law enforcement scrambled to find a lead that would finally end the nightmare. The Zodiac, however, thrived in this chaos. He had become more than a killer. He was a master manipulator of fear, a puppeteer whose strings reached into homes, classrooms, and newspapers. His next moves would reveal just how cunning and methodical he truly was. October 13, 1969. The San Francisco Chronicle received another letter. Unlike the previous notes, this one was different. It contained a full cryptogram, a complex cipher designed to challenge anyone who dared to solve it. The letter was arrogant, confident, mocking even, and it included a chilling declaration. He would continue killing unless his message was published. Inside the cipher was a mix of circles, triangles, and other strange symbols. It was a puzzle no one had seen before, a true reflection of a mind that delighted in leaving others helplessly guessing. School teacher Donald Hardin and his wife Betty, avid puzzle enthusiasts, took on the challenge and managed to crack part of the code. What they revealed chilled the nation. The Zodiac admitted to enjoying killing, to feeling an unnatural thrill when taking life, and to a warped belief that murder gave him power over destiny itself. It was not just a confession, it was a psychological manifesto, a glimpse into a mind that did not conform to morality, empathy, or reason. The letters demonstrated something more terrifying than the acts themselves. The Zodiac wanted the world to fear him, to obsess over him, and to never forget his name. By November, the Zodiac had escalated. He had claimed responsibility for additional murders in letters sent to newspapers in San Francisco, Vallejo, and Napa. Each correspondence was crafted to keep investigators off balance, to create a sense of urgency and dread, and to ensure he remained the center of public attention. Police departments across Northern California were inundated with calls, tips, and false confessions. Officers worked tirelessly, but the Zodiac seemed one step ahead. He was patient, strategic, and methodical, a predator who carefully calculated his moves. Public fascination grew alongside fear. People speculated endlessly about his identity, sharing theories in newspapers, on radio shows, and in casual conversation. Could he be a doctor, a teacher, a serviceman, or perhaps an unassuming man living unnoticed among them, a neighbor, a coworker, a friend? The possibilities were endless, and each new theory only added to the mythos of the Zodiac. He became the subject of obsessive discussions, a phantom who seemed everywhere and nowhere at once. Despite this, investigators tried to profile him. Behavioral analysts examined the letters, studying syntax, handwriting, and psychological clues. They looked at the pattern of attacks, the selection of victims, the timing and locations. One theory suggested he sought notoriety above all else, carefully choosing victims who would maximize media coverage. Another suggested a meticulous obsession with control and terror, a killer whose primary goal was psychological dominance. But no matter how thorough the analysis, no single lead brought them closer to his capture. December 20th, 1969. Another letter arrived, addressed to the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside, the Zodiac included another cipher, even more complex than the first. He demanded it be published, threatened further violence, and mocked law enforcement's inability to stop him. This letter was more than a threat. It was a performance, a twisted theater where he controlled the narrative, manipulating public perception and law enforcement alike. The message inside was chilling, revealing a man who calculated every word, every symbol, every punctuation mark to provoke fear, confusion, and obsession. In the months that followed, the Zodiac continued sending letters with cryptograms, some solved, some remaining an impenetrable mystery. Each letter contained taunts, hints, and threats, carefully designed to elicit attention from media and police alike. The Zodiac became not just a criminal, but an icon of terror, a name whispered in homes and workplaces across California. Parents warned children to stay away from strangers. Couples avoided lovers' lanes, and entire communities remained on edge. He had succeeded in creating a climate of fear that was as powerful as any physical crime scene, and it spread far beyond the locations of his attacks. Investigators attempted to link him to unsolved murders across the state, hoping to catch him in the act or predict his next move. They compiled suspect lists, reviewed hundreds of tips, and even conducted roadblocks in areas he might target. Yet, he seemed untouchable. Witnesses provided conflicting descriptions, the ciphers contained only partial clues, and each lead led to more questions than answers. The Zodiac had become a ghost who eluded capture, a figure whose influence stretched far beyond the scope of any single murder. Every newspaper publication, every solved cipher, every frantic tip call only reinforced his legend. By the end of 1969, the Zodiac had firmly established his pattern: cold-blooded attacks, cryptic letters, psychological manipulation, and complete control over the public imagination. He was unpredictable, yet meticulous, violent, yet theatrical. Every crime, every cipher, every taunting letter ensured that California, and eventually the entire nation, was aware of the presence of a killer unlike any other. And as 1970 approached, it became painfully clear. This was a man who did not act out of necessity, but out of obsession. And his obsession would not end until he chose it to end.
1970 arrived, and with it, the Zodiac's shadow only grew longer. The calm of California's towns had vanished. Ordinary nights carried a tension that could be cut with a knife. Police forces from multiple jurisdictions were now coordinating, sharing files, tips, and suspect profiles. Detectives pored over every detail from previous attacks, every letter, every cryptogram. They examined handwriting, word choice, psychological patterns, and even minute details in the victim's routines. But the Zodiac remained elusive, always a step ahead. He was no longer just a murderer. He was an enigma, a master of manipulation, whose game was psychological warfare on a massive scale. On February 2, 1970, the Zodiac struck again. This time, his target was the small town of Napa. Taxi driver Paul Stein's murder was still fresh in the public mind, but the killer's actions now seemed bolder. Witnesses described seeing a suspicious man near local streets, a figure who moved quietly yet confidently, seemingly blending into the ordinary flow of life. Though police increased patrols, Zodiac's attacks were unpredictable. Each crime scene, each letter, each cryptic message was meticulously calculated to instill fear, maintain anonymity, and taunt those pursuing him. Letters continued to flood in. One arrived in the spring, addressed to 3 prominent newspapers: the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Inside were new ciphers, this time longer and more intricate, with references to his previous attacks and allusions to future ones. The letters were a psychological puzzle, each word crafted to make readers anxious, obsessed, and fearful. In one particular note, he claimed responsibility for 14 additional victims beyond those already confirmed, a statement that caused investigators to re-examine unsolved cases, attempting to link them to his handiwork. The Zodiac's messages weren't just letters, they were performances. He included his crosshair symbol, told stories of his murders, and sometimes added whimsical details designed to confuse or mock the public. The tone varied, ranging from casual arrogance to chilling threats. His ability to instill terror through words as much as action created a climate of paranoia. Citizens avoided isolated roads and lovers' lanes, and even dimly lit parking lots. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every stranger a potential threat. The killer had expanded his influence far beyond the reach of law enforcement. In July of 1970, he intensified his communications, sending a letter to the Chronicle that contained a mysterious message, a long, coded statement hinting at past and future crimes. Experts attempted to decode the complex cipher, but the Zodiac had mastered misdirection. Some of the symbols appeared to be deliberately misleading, and portions of the code remained unsolved to this day. Psychologists analyzing the letters concluded that he craved recognition, fear, and psychological control far more than he did actual physical gratification. Every communication was a way to assert dominance, to prove that he could escape scrutiny while orchestrating a national spectacle of terror. At the same time, investigators began compiling suspect lists, interviewing hundreds of potential witnesses, and following leads that spanned multiple counties. They examined patterns, studied the timing and location of attacks, and compared handwriting from letters to thousands of civilian samples. Amateur detectives, journalists, and ordinary citizens also contributed theories, obsessively analyzing ciphers and scrutinizing newspaper archives. Yet, despite exhaustive efforts, the Zodiac remained just out of reach. Each failed attempt only amplified his notoriety, solidifying him as almost a mythical figure within California and across the country. The summer of 1970 was marked not only by fear, but by a chilling sense of unpredictability. The Zodiac now threatened to escalate, hinting at more public killings, more complex ciphers, and even wider targets. The public's imagination ran wild. Speculations about his identity ranged from a college student to a military veteran to a quiet family man. But nobody could say for sure, and that uncertainty was exactly what the Zodiac wanted. He had turned the state into a stage, every citizen into an unwitting participant in his terrifying game. In October, he sent another letter, this one directly challenging the police. He claimed he had already killed 14 people, referenced past murders, and threatened more attacks if his words were ignored. The audacity and cold calculation stunned law enforcement. With each communication, he manipulated public perception, crafted media hysteria, and ensured that he remained in control of both fear and narrative. By late 1970, a terrifying reality had set in. The Zodiac was not merely a criminal, but an enduring legend of terror. His letters and ciphers had created an ongoing psychological war against the public and police alike. Families lived in dread of the dark, lovers avoided quiet places, and authorities faced a relentless, taunting adversary whose identity and motives remained a chilling mystery. The world watched, feared, and speculated, realizing that the Zodiac's obsession and his deadly game was far from over.
As 1971 dawned, the Zodiac's presence continued to haunt California, but with each passing attack and cryptic letter, the public's fear escalated into a near-constant state of paranoia. Communities were on edge, parents warned children not to talk to strangers, and couples avoided isolated roads and lovers' lanes. Police forces, exhausted and frustrated, intensified their investigations. Detectives across Vallejo, San Francisco, Napa, and beyond coordinated, yet the Zodiac seemed untouchable. Every lead brought false hope. Every tip seemed to evaporate into nothing. On March 13, 1971, the Zodiac sent another letter, this one claiming credit for attacks that may never have been confirmed, hinting at crimes outside the areas previously targeted. The letter contained fragments of ciphers, messages designed to confuse investigators and the public alike. Experts who had decoded his earlier ciphers struggled with the new ones, realizing that his sophistication had increased. The Zodiac wasn't just a murderer. He was a master manipulator of fear and information, controlling the narrative as meticulously as he orchestrated his attacks. In April of 1971, law enforcement began to develop a new understanding of the Zodiac's psychology. Behavioral profiling, still a relatively new practice, suggested he was intelligent, meticulous, and obsessive. He likely had knowledge of police procedures, understood forensic techniques, and carefully studied media coverage of his crimes. Yet, the profile provided little more than a broad picture. His identity remained shrouded in mystery. Every cryptic letter reinforced the idea that he wanted control over public perception, making him a predator who killed not only for pleasure, but to dominate fear itself. By the summer, his letters became increasingly taunting, claiming responsibility for killings that investigators could not verify. In one particularly chilling correspondence, he threatened the police directly, promising more attacks if his messages were not published. The letters were a masterclass in psychological warfare, each carefully designed to elicit panic, obsession, and helplessness among both authorities and citizens. The public devoured every word, speculating endlessly about who the Zodiac could be, what he looked like, or where he might strike next. Despite numerous suspect leads, including over 2,500 people questioned, hundreds of tips, and dozens of suspects under serious investigation, the Zodiac remained free. One of the most compelling leads involved Arthur Lee Allen, a man repeatedly scrutinized for connections to the murders and the letters. Evidence included his possible possession of firearms similar to those used in attacks, his interest in ciphers and cryptography, and suspicious behavior reported by acquaintances. However, nothing definitively linked him to the Zodiac, leaving investigators frustrated and the public yearning for answers. Throughout 1971 and 1972, the Zodiac continued sending letters and ciphers, some of which remain unsolved to this day. Each letter was signed with his infamous crosshair symbol, a chilling trademark that signaled not just death, but control. The ciphers varied in complexity. Some were solved, revealing taunts, threats, and confessions, while others defied decoding, maintaining the aura of mystery surrounding him. With every communication, he ensured that he remained in the public eye, a master of media manipulation long before social media existed. The peak of public hysteria occurred when newspapers published excerpts from his letters and cryptograms. Citizens obsessed over every detail, comparing handwriting samples, theorizing about the symbols, and speculating on his identity. Police forces were inundated with calls, some genuine tips, others false or malicious. But the Zodiac thrived in this chaos, his persona amplified by media coverage and public fascination. He had become more than a criminal. He was a legend,
a ghost story told in real time across California. By late 1972, after a series of letters and cryptograms, the Zodiac's activity began to taper, though he never stopped completely. No one could say whether he had moved, ceased his killing, or was simply planning his next act. Despite exhaustive investigations, technological advances, and decades of detective work, his identity remained elusive. The combination of calculated violence, cryptic communication, and media manipulation ensured that his myth would endure far beyond his attacks. By the end of Part 5, it was clear that the Zodiac Killer had achieved what few criminals ever could. He had turned terror into an art form, leaving a lasting mark on American society, law enforcement, and the collective imagination. His obsession with control, recognition, and fear had created a phenomenon that would remain unsolved, enigmatic, and chilling for decades to come.
Even decades later, the Zodiac Killer continues to haunt the American consciousness. Law enforcement agencies, amateur sleuths, and historians have pored over evidence, letters, and unsolved ciphers, hoping for a breakthrough that could finally unmask him. Fingerprints, handwriting analysis, and DNA technology have been applied to the tiniest traces left behind, yet his identity remains a mystery. Each generation discovers the case anew, captivated by the same chilling details that terrorized California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The letters, filled with cryptic codes, threats, and taunting messages, continue to inspire debate and obsession. Some ciphers have been solved, revealing horrifying confessions and twisted psychological insights, while others remain enigmatic puzzles. These undeciphered messages are a haunting reminder of a mind that reveled in control, manipulation, and fear, a mind that thrived on the uncertainty and paranoia he created. The Zodiac didn't just commit murders. He orchestrated a climate of terror that transcended physical crimes, reaching into homes, classrooms, and newspapers across the nation. Psychologists and criminologists have examined his behavior for decades, attempting to understand his motives. He was meticulous, intelligent, and highly organized, yet impulsive in a way that made him unpredictable. His obsession with recognition, his need to be feared, and his compulsion to communicate through letters and ciphers mark him as one of the most psychologically complex serial killers in American history. Every attack, every letter, every cryptic message was a performance designed to elevate his status in a way that few criminals have ever achieved. The cultural impact of the Zodiac Killer is undeniable. Books, documentaries, films, podcasts, and television shows have explored his crimes and the psychological terror he inflicted. The case has influenced generations of investigators, writers, and true crime enthusiasts, serving both as a cautionary tale and as a study of human fascination with mystery and evil. The Zodiac became not just a criminal, but a symbol of the unknown, a figure who embodies the fear of an unseen predator lurking within society. Despite intense scrutiny, suspects have come and gone, each investigated thoroughly, yet never definitively tied to the crimes. Arthur Lee Allen, a prime suspect for years, never faced conviction. Many others were considered and cleared. The truth remains obscured, hidden behind decades of speculation, lost evidence, and a man who vanished without a trace, leaving only letters, symbols, and the lingering question of who he really was. And so the mystery endures. The Zodiac Killer stands as a reminder of the fragility of safety, the power of fear, and the enduring allure of unsolved crimes. His story continues to grip imaginations, challenge investigators, and remind the world that some questions may never have answers. For every decoded cipher, there is one that remains unsolved. For every theory, a dozen more emerge. He became more than a man. He became an idea, a legend, a shadow that stretches over time, impossible to fully escape. As the sun sets over Northern California, the roads he once walked feel empty yet ominous. The streets, the parks, the quiet neighborhoods, these places hold memories of screams, blood, and unanswered questions. And even today, the question remains, who was the Zodiac Killer? How did he evade justice for so long? And perhaps most chilling of all, could he still be out there, watching, waiting as the nation continues to tell his story over and over again? In the end, the Zodiac's legacy is not measured solely by the lives he took, but by the fear he instilled, the mystery he created, and the enduring fascination he inspires. A killer who transcended his crimes, becoming a legend that refuses to fade, a reminder that some shadows are never fully chased away, and some mysteries are never meant to be solved.